There is a moment in some emotionally destructive relationships when you begin asking yourself a question that sounds simple, but carries an enormous amount of pain. Why am I the one who feels like I have to leave? You may have entered the relationship wanting connection. You may have believed that if two people loved each other, they would eventually understand each other. You may have thought that communication could solve almost anything, and yet, somewhere along the way, you found yourself exhausted, confused, anxious, and constantly questioning whether you were asking for too much. You weren't necessarily told to leave. Sometimes something much more complicated happened. The relationship became so emotionally unbearable that leaving began to feel like the only way you could breathe again. And this is one of the most psychologically confusing dynamics you can experience with someone who has strong narcissistic traits. They may not always be the person who openly ends the relationship. Sometimes they may create conditions in which you eventually end it yourself. You may reach a point where you say, "I can't do this anymore." Then, strangely, the moment you leave, the story may become that you abandoned them. Suddenly, your exhaustion is forgotten. The months or years of emotional instability disappear from the narrative. Your final decision becomes the only thing anyone talks about. But I want you to understand something today. Leaving a relationship that repeatedly harms your emotional well-being does not automatically mean you failed at love. Sometimes leaving is what happens after you have tried everything you knew how to try. Sometimes the person who finally walks away is not the person who destroyed the relationship. Sometimes they are simply the person who finally accepted that they could not repair it alone. Think about how slowly this can happen. It rarely begins with an obvious announcement saying, "I am going to make you leave." Instead, the relationship may change in small ways. The affection becomes less predictable. The warmth disappears and returns without explanation. Conversations become arguments. Your concerns become accusations. You bring up something that hurt you, and somehow you end up apologizing. You ask for reassurance, and you are told that you are needy. You ask for consistency, and you are accused of being controlling. You ask for respect, and suddenly you are too sensitive. At first, you try harder. You explain more carefully. You choose your words. You become more patient. You research communication techniques. You wonder whether your childhood has made you insecure. You wonder whether you're overreacting. You tell yourself that everyone has bad days. You remember the good moments and use them as evidence that the relationship is still worth saving. And because you remember those good moments, you stay. This is where psychology becomes important. Human beings are not simply responding to what happens today. We are also responding to what happened yesterday and what we hope will happen tomorrow. When affection and rejection become unpredictable, the mind can become intensely focused on restoring the good moments. You may start thinking, if I can just get back to the person they were in the beginning, everything will be okay. But sometimes the beginning was not a reliable preview of the relationship. Sometimes it was simply a period when the relationship felt different because the circumstances were different. This does not mean every affectionate person is manipulating you. It does not mean every inconsistent partner is narcissistic. And it does not mean that anyone who withdraws emotionally has a personality disorder. Human behavior is complicated. People can become distant because of stress, depression, grief, immaturity, conflict, incompatibility, or many other reasons. But when a repeated pattern includes manipulation, entitlement, exploitation, chronic invalidation, blame shifting, and a refusal to take meaningful responsibility, the impact on the other person can become profoundly destabilizing. And eventually, you may begin to feel like you are walking on eggshells inside your own life. You become careful about your tone, careful about your timing, careful about what you ask, careful about what you remember, careful about what you say, careful about what you need. And somewhere in that carefulness, you begin disappearing. This is one of the most heartbreaking parts of emotional abuse. The person may not have to physically remove you from the relationship. They may not have to say, "You are no longer allowed to be yourself." The repeated emotional consequences may teach you to silence yourself. You learn that honesty creates conflict. You learn that boundaries create punishment. You learn that questions create defensiveness. You learn that vulnerability creates ammunition. You learn that disagreement creates withdrawal. So you adapt. You become quieter. You become more accommodating. You stop bringing things up. You tell yourself, it's not worth another argument. And eventually, your silence becomes mistaken for peace. But silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is exhaustion. Sometimes silence is fear. Sometimes silence is the final stage before someone realizes they cannot continue living this way. This is why the idea of being pushed to discard yourself matters. The discard may not happen through one dramatic event. It may happen through accumulation. One criticism, one betrayal, one silent treatment, one humiliation, one broken promise, one accusation. One moment where you realize that you are once again defending yourself against something you never did. And then one day, something inside you becomes quiet. Not angry, not dramatic, just finished. You may not even recognize yourself in that moment. You may sit alone and realize, I don't want to keep explaining myself anymore. That realization can be terrifying because relationships like this often train you to believe that leaving means you are cruel, selfish, disloyal, or incapable of commitment. But commitment does not require self-abandonment. Love does not require you to tolerate unlimited disrespect. Compassion does not require you to surrender your boundaries. And understanding another person's wounds does not require you to become the place where those wounds are repeatedly inflicted. There is another psychological pattern that can make this especially confusing. Provocation followed by blame. Imagine that someone repeatedly dismisses you. You try to discuss it calmly. They interrupt you. You try again. They mock your concern. You become frustrated. They tell you that you're becoming emotional. You try to explain why you're emotional. They become even more dismissive. Eventually, you raise your voice. And now the entire conversation becomes about your raised voice. Suddenly, everything that happened before your reaction disappears. You're aggressive. You're unstable. You're impossible to talk to. You always create drama. And you begin wondering, maybe I really am the problem. This is where you have to learn something powerful. A reaction can be real without being the root cause of the conflict. You can be responsible for how you react without being responsible for everything that happened before the reaction. That distinction is essential. If you shouted, you can acknowledge that. If you said something hurtful, you can take responsibility for that. Healing does not require you to pretend that you handled every moment perfectly. But accountability is different from accepting a distorted story in which your reaction becomes proof that you deserved the treatment that preceded it. You are allowed to say, I don't like how I reacted, and I also recognize that this relationship has repeatedly brought me into a state where I no longer recognize myself. That is emotional maturity. You don't need to make yourself perfect before you are allowed to leave. You don't need to prove that you were flawless. You don't need a courtroom transcript of every argument. You don't need the other person to agree with your version of events. Sometimes the clarity you need is simply this. This relationship is harming me, and I am no longer willing to participate in this pattern. That sentence can change your life. Because when you stop trying to convince the other person, you begin listening to yourself. And this is where emotional detachment begins. Emotional detachment does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean becoming narcissistic yourself. It does not mean pretending you never loved them. It means learning that another person's emotional state does not have to control your identity. If they are angry, you don't automatically have to panic. If they are disappointed, you don't automatically have to fix it. If they accuse you, you don't automatically have to defend yourself for an hour. If they withdraw, you don't automatically have to chase them. If they rewrite history, you don't automatically have to enter the courtroom and present evidence. Sometimes the most powerful response is not another explanation. It is a boundary. I am not continuing this conversation while I am being insulted. I have made my decision. I am not discussing this again. I will respond only to practical matters. I am ending this conversation now. Those statements may feel unnatural when you have spent years trying to maintain emotional peace by over-explaining yourself. But boundaries are not arguments. A boundary is not a demand that someone become different. A boundary is a decision about what you will do when something happens. That difference is incredibly important. You cannot control whether another person respects your boundary. You can control whether you continue participating in an interaction that repeatedly violates it. And sometimes the person who has benefited from your lack of boundaries will react strongly when you establish them. That reaction does not automatically mean your boundary is wrong. It may simply mean that the relationship is changing. You may discover that the relationship worked best for the other person when you were endlessly flexible, when you were always available, when you apologized first, when you accepted responsibility for everything, when you questioned yourself instead of questioning the dynamic, when you stayed. And when you stop doing those things, the relationship may feel dramatically different. This is why no contact can become such an important part of healing for some people. No contact is not revenge. No contact is not a performance. No contact is not a strategy designed to make somebody chase you. No contact is not, let me disappear so they will finally understand my worth. That keeps your emotional attention attached to them. Healthy no contact, when it is appropriate and safe, is about returning your attention to yourself. It says, I am no longer going to repeatedly expose my emotional system to a dynamic that destabilizes me. And if complete no contact is impossible because of children, work, legal responsibilities, shared property, or other circumstances, emotional boundaries and low conflict communication may still be possible. You can become less available for emotional chaos without becoming cruel. You can communicate only what is necessary. You can stop explaining your personal life. You can stop responding instantly. You can stop defending your character against every accusation. You can keep conversations focused on practical matters. And most importantly, you can stop measuring your healing by their reaction. This is where many people get stuck. They say, I went no contact, but they haven't contacted me. Or, they contacted me, but they didn't apologize. Or, they seem happy. Or, they moved on. Or, they are treating someone else better. And suddenly, the healing process becomes another way of monitoring the narcissistic person. But your freedom cannot depend on whether they regret losing you. If they regret it, you still heal. If they don't regret it, you still heal. If they apologize, you still heal. If they never apologize, you still heal. If they try to return, you still maintain your boundaries. If they never return, you still build your life. That is the point where your power begins to come back, because your power is not in making them feel what you felt. Your power is in no longer requiring them to feel it before you allow yourself to move forward. You may have spent months asking, how could they do this to me? Eventually, healing asks a different question. What do I need to do for myself now? That question shifts everything. It moves you from investigation to recovery, from obsession to direction, from their behavior to your boundaries, from their motives to your values, from their validation to your self-trust. And self-trust may be one of the greatest things emotional abuse can damage. You may begin doubting your perception. You may reread conversations. You may ask friends what they think. You may remember an event and wonder whether you imagined how painful it was. You may even miss the person and conclude that perhaps the relationship was not that bad. But missing someone does not prove that the relationship was healthy. Love and harm can coexist in complicated ways. You can miss someone and still know you cannot be with them. You can remember beautiful moments and still acknowledge the destructive pattern. You can feel compassion for someone and still refuse access to your life. You can understand why someone behaves a certain way without excusing the consequences of that behavior. That is emotional maturity. Healing does not require you to hate the person. In fact, sometimes hatred keeps you connected almost as strongly as love. You wake up thinking about what they did. You imagine what you wish you had said. You imagine them realizing what they lost. You imagine the day they regret everything, and your mind is still living inside their world. Freedom begins when you no longer need a final scene. You may never receive the perfect apology. You may never get the admission you deserve. You may never hear, "Yes, I hurt you." You may never see the person understand the impact of their behavior. And that is painful. But your healing cannot wait indefinitely for someone else's psychological development. There are people who spend years waiting for closure from someone who is fundamentally unwilling or unable to provide it. But closure is not always something someone gives you. Sometimes closure is the decision to stop reopening the wound. You close the door because you have enough information. You don't need another argument to confirm what the previous 100 arguments already showed you. You don't need another betrayal to prove that betrayal hurts. You don't need another insult to establish that insults are unacceptable. You don't need another round of confusion before you are allowed to choose clarity. And if you are listening to this while still inside the relationship, I want you to hear this carefully. You do not have to make a dramatic decision today simply because you have finally recognized a pattern. Take safety seriously. Think practically. Reach out to trustworthy people, documenting important information when appropriate. Protect your finances and important documents where necessary. If there is intimidation, stalking, threats, violence, or fear for your physical safety, prioritize a safe plan and professional support rather than confronting the person impulsively. Emotional empowerment is not reckless. It is thoughtful. It is strategic. It is grounded. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is quietly prepare while you rebuild your ability to think clearly. Because confusion is exhausting, and clarity often needs space. This is why distance can reveal things that proximity hides. When you're constantly reacting, you don't have time to observe. When you're constantly defending yourself, you don't have time to evaluate. When you're constantly trying to restore peace, you don't have time to ask whether the relationship is peaceful at all. But when you step back, you may begin noticing patterns. You may notice that every boundary creates the same argument. You may notice that every apology is followed by the same behavior. You may notice that affection increases when you pull away and decreases when you become emotionally secure. You may notice that promises are strongest when consequences are approaching. You may notice that conversations always end with you questioning yourself. These observations can be painful, but painful clarity is often healthier than comforting confusion. And perhaps the hardest thing you will learn is that you cannot love someone into treating you well. You can communicate, you can encourage, you can forgive, you can support, you can be patient, but you cannot manufacture another person's willingness to take responsibility. You cannot do their emotional work for them. You cannot regulate their emotions for them. You cannot build their self-awareness for them. And you cannot carry a relationship for two people indefinitely. At some point, love requires reality. And reality says that relationships are built through mutual participation. If only one person is reflecting, repairing, apologizing, adapting, and sacrificing, then what looks like commitment may actually be self-abandonment. You may have confused endurance with love. You may have thought, if I stay long enough, they'll finally understand. But sometimes staying longer only teaches you to tolerate more. You are not required to keep suffering just because you have already suffered for a long time. Your past investment does not obligate your future. The years you spent trying were not wasted. They taught you, they revealed you, they showed you how deeply you can love. They also showed you where you need boundaries. Let the experience educate you without allowing it to define you. You are not the person who was manipulated. You are not the person who was discarded. You are not the person who was called too sensitive. You are not the person who was repeatedly told that your needs were a burden. You are the person who survived the experience and is now learning to listen to yourself again. And that rebuilding can be surprisingly ordinary. Healing may not look like a dramatic transformation. It may look like sleeping peacefully, eating regularly, going outside, calling a friend, returning to a hobby, cleaning your room, finishing a project, laughing without checking your phone, driving without replaying an argument, waking up without immediately wondering what they are doing. That is healing. Sometimes healing is simply having a morning where their name doesn't enter your mind until noon, and eventually, perhaps, not until evening, and eventually, perhaps, not at all. Do not measure your healing by how quickly you stop remembering. Measure it by how much control the memory has over you. You can remember without returning. You can grieve without contacting. You can miss without reopening. You can love the person you thought they were without accepting the relationship they actually offered. There is grief in that, real grief. Because sometimes you are not only grieving the person, you are grieving the future you imagined, the family you imagined, the apology you imagined, the version of them you hoped would appear, the version of yourself you believed you would become inside the relationship. And grieving an imagined future can be just as painful as grieving a real past. So don't rush yourself. You don't have to be inspirational every day. Some days you will feel powerful. Other days you will feel lonely. Some days you will know exactly why you left. Other days you will remember the good moments and wonder whether you made a mistake. That does not mean you are going backward. Healing is not a straight line. Your nervous system may still expect the old cycle. If affection used to arrive unpredictably, calmness may initially feel strange. If conflict was followed by reconciliation, peace may initially feel empty. If you were constantly monitoring another person's mood, having nobody to monitor may feel uncomfortable. Your mind may actually miss the intensity. But intensity is not intimacy. Anxiety is not chemistry. Uncertainty is not passion. Being chosen one day and rejected the next is not evidence of extraordinary love. Sometimes your body becomes accustomed to chaos and then mistakes calm for boredom. Give yourself time. Your system can learn another way of living. A healthier relationship with yourself begins with small promises. I will believe myself. I will listen when I feel uncomfortable. I will stop explaining boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. I will not abandon myself to keep someone else happy. I will not confuse guilt with responsibility. I will not treat another person's anger as proof that I am wrong. I will pause before responding. I will choose consistency over intensity. These are not just affirmations. They are decisions. And every time you keep a healthy promise to yourself, self-trust grows. Maybe the most important promise is this: I will not make myself smaller just to make another person comfortable. Because you may have spent a long time shrinking. You lowered your expectations. You lowered your voice. You lowered your standards. You lowered your needs. You lowered your dreams. You lowered yourself. And perhaps the person you became inside that relationship was not the real you. Perhaps it was the survival version of you, the version that knew how to avoid conflict, the version that could read a mood from a facial expression, the version that could apologize before knowing what happened, the version that could sense tension from across the room, the version that could abandon their own feelings before anyone else had the opportunity to reject them. That person deserves compassion. Don't shame yourself for the survival strategies that once protected you. You learned what you had to learn. Now you can learn something new. You can learn that you don't have to predict every mood. You don't have to prevent every conflict. You don't have to earn basic respect. You don't have to convince someone that your feelings are real. You don't have to perform emotional labor for everyone around you. You can simply exist. You can breathe. You can disagree. You can say no. You can take time. You can change your mind. You can have needs. You can be imperfect. You can be human. And the right relationships will not require you to disappear in order to remain connected. This is where the title of this message becomes something deeper than a description of narcissistic behavior. How narcissists push you to do the discard yourself is not ultimately a story about how they make you leave. It is a story about how you eventually recognize that you have been leaving yourself every day just to keep the relationship alive. You abandoned your intuition. You abandoned your boundaries. You abandoned your friendships. You abandoned your interests. You abandoned your voice. You abandoned your standards. And when you finally walked away from the relationship, you may have thought you were losing them, but perhaps you were beginning to find yourself. That is the transformation. The goal is not to become someone who never loves again. The goal is to become someone who no longer has to betray themselves in order to love. You can love deeply and have boundaries. You can be compassionate and discerning. You can forgive and still walk away. You can understand someone's history without becoming responsible for their behavior. You can give people second chances without giving them unlimited access. And you can choose peace without needing anyone else to call you justified. There will come a day when you stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" And you will begin asking, "Why did I believe I had to be enough for someone to treat me with basic respect?" That question contains freedom, because respect was never supposed to be a prize you won by becoming perfect. You did not need to become quieter to deserve kindness. You did not need to become prettier to deserve loyalty. You did not need to become more successful to deserve consideration. You did not need to become endlessly patient to deserve honesty. You did not need to become emotionally invulnerable to deserve safety. You were a human being asking for a healthy relationship. And if someone could not or would not provide that, their inability does not define your worth. Perhaps the greatest emotional trap is believing that if you can just understand the narcissistic person deeply enough, you will finally know what to do. So you study them. You analyze their childhood. You analyze their attachment. You analyze their ego. You analyze their social media. You analyze their new partner. You analyze their silence. You analyze their message. You analyze the timing. You analyze everything. And slowly, the person you are studying becomes more important than the person you are supposed to be healing. You, at some point, stop studying the locked door and start building the road forward. You don't need to understand every psychological mechanism to know that you are hurting. You don't need to diagnose someone to establish a boundary. You don't need to prove narcissism to justify leaving a relationship that is unhealthy for you. This distinction can protect you from getting trapped in endless analysis. Labs can sometimes help people understand patterns, but labels should not become the center of your life. Your question does not have to be, "Are they officially a narcissist?" Your question can simply be, "Is this relationship healthy for me? Do I feel safe? Can I express myself? Are my boundaries respected? Can conflict be repaired? Is accountability mutual? Am I becoming more myself or less myself?" Those questions can tell you a great deal. And if the answers are painful, listen. Not with panic, with honesty. Your life is too valuable to spend forever trying to persuade someone to value it. There is a future version of you who is going to look back at this chapter differently, not because the past becomes acceptable, but because the past becomes smaller. Today, it may feel like the center of everything. Eventually, it can become one chapter. You will have new conversations, new routines, new goals, new laughter, new memories, maybe new love. But even before another relationship enters your life, there is a relationship that needs rebuilding. The relationship with yourself. Learn your own voice again. Ask yourself what you like. Ask yourself what you want. Ask yourself what you no longer tolerate. Ask yourself what peace feels like. Ask yourself what consistency feels like. Ask yourself what respect looks like, and then practice living accordingly. You don't have to become fearless. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is deciding that fear does not get to make every decision. You may be afraid of being alone. You may be afraid that they will replace you. You may be afraid that you will regret leaving. You may be afraid that nobody else will love you. But fear is not prophecy. Loneliness is not proof that you made the wrong decision. Missing someone is not proof that you should return. And uncertainty is not proof that you should abandon your boundary. Sometimes you are standing at the beginning of a healthier life, and because you cannot see the whole road yet, you assume there is no road. Keep walking. You don't need to see the entire staircase. You need enough clarity to take the next step. The next step might be no contact. The next step might be therapy. The next step might be telling a trusted friend the truth. The next step might be setting one boundary. The next step might be sleeping without checking their social media. The next step might be deleting a conversation you keep rereading. The next step might simply be saying, I am tired of hurting myself to keep this relationship alive. Whatever the next step is, let it be about your life, not their punishment, not their regret, not their reaction, your life. Because the opposite of narcissistic control is not controlling the narcissist. It is refusing to organize your life around them. That is freedom. When you no longer ask whether they noticed your absence, you are becoming free. When you no longer post things hoping they will see them, you are becoming free. When you no longer need their new relationship to fail so that you can feel valuable, you are becoming free. When you no longer need them to admit that they hurt you, you are becoming free. When you can hear their name without your entire body changing, you are becoming free. When you can remember the relationship without wanting to return to it, you are becoming free. And eventually, you may reach a place where the question is no longer, how do I make them understand what they lost? It becomes, how did I ever believe losing myself was the price of keeping them? That is the awakening. You were never supposed to earn love through suffering. You were never supposed to prove your loyalty by tolerating emotional destruction. You were never supposed to sacrifice your identity to maintain someone else's comfort. And you are not selfish for choosing yourself now. You are not cruel for establishing distance. You are not bitter because you remember what happened. You are not broken because healing takes time. You are human. You loved, you hoped, you tried, you endured, you learned. And now you are choosing differently. Let that choice be gentle. You don't need to rebuild your entire life overnight. Start with one honest decision. Stop arguing with your own experience. Stop minimizing what hurt you. Stop calling your exhaustion weakness. Stop calling your boundaries cruelty. Stop calling your intuition insecurity simply because someone else disagrees with it. You are allowed to trust the pattern you experienced. And if you made mistakes, forgive yourself. Maybe you stayed too long. Maybe you went back. Maybe you ignored warning signs. Maybe you believed promises. Maybe you defended them to people who were trying to protect you. Maybe you defended the relationship because you desperately wanted it to work. Don't use that history as evidence that you are foolish. Use it as evidence that you are capable of learning. Wisdom is often built from experiences we wish we had never needed. You do not have to hate the person who hurt you in order to protect yourself from being hurt again. You do not have to understand everything that happened. You do not have to win the final argument. You do not have to get the final word. You can leave the conversation unfinished. You can let someone misunderstand you. You can let someone tell their version. You can let them believe whatever they choose. Your responsibility is not to control the story they tell. Your responsibility is to live according to your values. And if they say you abandoned them, remember that only you know how long you tried to stay. If they say you changed, remember that healing often changes people. If they say you are selfish, remember that boundaries can look selfish to someone who benefited from your self-neglect. If they say you are cold, remember that distance may be necessary when closeness repeatedly causes harm. You don't need to argue. You need to heal. Let them have their narrative. You have your life. And your life is bigger than this relationship. There are parts of you that existed before them. There are parts of you waiting to return. There are dreams that were postponed, friendships that deserve attention, skills you stopped using, places you stopped visiting, music you stopped listening to, laughter you forgot, rest you forgot. You are still here, maybe tired, maybe wounded, maybe confused. But here, and that matters. You survived the version of yourself that believed you had to keep sacrificing in order to be loved. Now build a version of yourself that understands something different. Healthy love does not demand that you disappear. Healthy love makes room for your humanity. Healthy love can survive disagreement. Healthy love does not require you to abandon your intuition. Healthy love does not punish you for having needs. Healthy love does not make you afraid to speak. And healthy love begins with a healthy relationship with yourself. So if you are at the point where you are considering leaving, Do not ask only, will they miss me? Ask, will I miss myself if I stay? That question may tell you more than any prediction about what they will do next. If you are already gone, don't ask, will they come back? Ask, will I go back to the version of myself I worked so hard to escape? If you are still confused, don't ask only, do they love me? Ask, can this relationship provide the emotional conditions I need to live well? Because love by itself is not enough. Compatibility matters. Accountability matters. Respect matters. Emotional safety matters. Consistency matters. And you matter. Let those words settle into you. You matter, not because someone chooses you, not because someone regrets losing you, not because someone praises you, not because someone finally sees your value. You matter because your life has value before anybody validates it. That is the truth you must carry forward. The discard you perform yourself does not have to be the end of your story. It can be the moment you stop abandoning yourself. It can be the moment you stop chasing clarity from someone committed to confusion. It can be the moment you stop trying to earn what should have been freely given. It can be the moment you realize that your peace is not a bargaining chip. You don't have to become harder. Become clearer. You don't have to become colder. Become more boundaried. You don't have to become suspicious of everyone. Become more discerning. You don't have to stop loving. Learn to love without abandoning yourself. And when you finally walk forward, walk without needing revenge. Let your healing be enough. Let your peace be enough. Let your quiet life be enough. Let the fact that you can breathe again be enough. Maybe they never understand. Let that be okay. Maybe they never apologize. Let that be okay. Maybe they tell a different story. Let that be okay. Your life does not require their permission to move forward. You have spent enough time trying to be understood by someone who may never understand you in the way you hoped. Now understand yourself. Listen to yourself. Protect yourself. Forgive yourself. Choose yourself. And when the old temptation comes back, when loneliness whispers that perhaps you should return, remember what you are actually missing. You may be missing a moment, not the entire pattern. You may be missing potential, not reality. You may be missing the beginning, not the ending. You may be missing who you hoped they would become. And hope can be beautiful, but hope must eventually make room for evidence. Look at the pattern. Look at the consistency. Look at the impact on you. Look at who you became. Then make your decision from reality rather than fantasy. You don't need to hate the past. You simply don't have to repeat it. There is strength in that. There is dignity in that. There is freedom in that. And one day, you may realize something extraordinary. You thought the relationship ended when you walked away. But perhaps that was not the real ending. Perhaps the real ending happened when you stopped needing the other person to tell you who you were. Perhaps the real ending happened when their accusation no longer became your identity. Perhaps the real ending happened when their silence no longer controlled your nervous system. Perhaps the real ending happened when you stopped waiting for them to return and started returning to yourself. That is the discard that matters. Not discarding another person, not destroying another person's ego, not proving that they lost the greatest person they ever had, but discarding the belief that you must lose yourself to keep someone else. Let that belief go. Let the guilt go. Let the endless explanations go. Let the fantasy of the perfect apology go. Let the need for revenge go. Let the need to be understood by everyone go. And take yourself with you. Take your voice. Take your standards. Take your tenderness. Take your intelligence. Take your humor. Take your dreams. Take your future. Take the lessons. Leave the chaos. Leave the endless courtroom. Leave the emotional treadmill. Leave the version of love that required you to disappear and walk towards something quieter, something steadier, something that does not require you to prove your worth every morning. Walk toward yourself. Because the greatest thing you can recover after narcissistic abuse is not the relationship. It is your relationship with your own mind, your own voice, your own instincts, your own boundaries, your own future. And when that relationship becomes strong again, something changes. You stop asking who will choose you. You start asking who is worthy of access to you. You stop asking how to make someone stay. You start asking whether their presence is healthy. You stop asking what you did wrong. You start asking what you learned. You stop asking how to win them back. You start asking how to win yourself back. And that is where your life begins again. Not because everything is suddenly perfect. Not because the pain disappears overnight. But because you finally stop making your healing dependent on the person who helped create the wound. You become responsible for your future. Not responsible for what happened to you. Not responsible for another person's behavior. But responsible for what you choose next. And that is a beautiful responsibility. So if you needed permission to stop explaining yourself, take it. If you needed permission to establish a boundary, take it. If you needed permission to leave an unhealthy dynamic, take it. If you needed permission to stop checking their life, take it. If you needed permission to grieve, take it. If you needed permission to rebuild slowly, take it. And if you needed permission to believe that you deserve a life where you can finally exhale, take that too. You do not have to become someone else. You do not have to become ruthless. You do not have to become emotionally unavailable. You simply have to become unwilling to abandon yourself. That is enough. And from that decision, everything can begin to change. Your boundaries can become stronger. Your mind can become quieter. Your relationships can become healthier. Your standards can become clearer. Your confidence can return. Your laughter can return. Your sleep can return. Your identity can return. And eventually, the story you tell about this chapter will change. You will stop saying, "That was the person who destroyed me." You may begin saying, "That was the experience that taught me never to abandon myself again." There is a difference. One keeps you trapped in what happened. The other carries the lesson forward. So keep the lesson, release the prison. You were never meant to spend the rest of your life proving that you were worthy to someone who could not give you the relationship you needed. You are allowed to walk. You are allowed to heal. You are allowed to become peaceful. You are allowed to become happy without making anyone else unhappy. And you are allowed to build a future that has nothing to do with whether they finally understand what they lost. Let them have their story. You will have your freedom. Let them remember you however they choose. You will remember yourself. And this time, remember yourself accurately, not as the person who was too much, not as the person who failed, not as the person who couldn't make it work. Remember yourself as the person who loved deeply, learned painfully, and eventually chose self-respect. Because sometimes the most powerful ending is not when someone else realizes they lost you. It is when you realize you had never needed to lose yourself in the first place. And from this moment forward, make yourself a promise. You will listen when your body says something is wrong. You will listen when your mind says the pattern is repeating. You will listen when your heart says it is exhausted. You will honor your boundaries. You will protect your peace. You will seek support when you need it. You will forgive yourself for the times you didn't know better. And you will stop punishing yourself for staying alive in a situation that required survival. Your next chapter does not need to be dramatic. It only needs to be yours. One peaceful morning, one honest conversation, one boundary, one healthy relationship, one moment of laughter, one decision to stop checking, one day without explaining, one night of real sleep. One morning when you realize you are no longer waiting, and then another, and another, until one day you look around and realize that the life you once thought you lost was never gone. It was waiting for you, and you finally came back. Back to your voice, back to your dignity, back to your boundaries, back to your peace, back to yourself. That is not a discard, that is a return. And this time, you are not returning to the relationship. You are returning to you.